All right, everybody, welcome to our special edition of Make Your Own Fun. We're going to cover the Beatles Get Back documentary, the Peter Don't Call It a Trilogy Jackson. I'm here with Gian Enzo Saja again. He was nice enough to grace us with his presence, and he is the author of Calling Me Back Again, the Beatles Records at 50. Look at that thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Beatles Yep, calling me back again. The Beatles records at 50.
Oh,
Heavily influenced by Ian McDonald's Revolution in the Head. In my opinion, the finest Beatles book ever by anybody. So I sort of kind of modeled the format of mine after that one. So if anybody's interested in a Beatles scholarship at its finest, but I would love to start off by, by the way, for viewers and listeners, if you haven't yet seen the Peter Jackson Don't Call It a Trilogy, there's going to be spoilers in our discussion here. Let's safe to say, so you might want to watch that first if you don't want things spoiled for you.
yes, and I will say we are recording this at the tail end of the Thanksgiving holiday, but it will be uploaded the Friday following, which will be, I believe, December 3rd.
Okay.
So that should give people hopefully plenty of time. I'll put a disclaimer on that because I thought I was going to have plenty of time, but honestly, I didn't quite make it all the way to the end because when we first talked about this project, I think you and I were messaging maybe a year ago going, hey, he's going to make a 2-hour documentary and there'll be some unreleased music. This is going to be great. And then the pandemic happened and it was like, oh, it's been expanded to this other thing. And like, oh, it's going to be on Disney Plus. It's going to be 3 parts. And I thought, oh, like 90 minutes an episode. No, each episode is I think averages to 2.5 hours plus. I think the episode 2 was almost 3 hours.
The second of the third, the middle was the longest, almost 3, and then the last one was 2 hours and 15, which I was surprised.
I think they just wanted to focus directly on the rooftop.
Yeah,
they wanted to kind of get all of the rehearsing and bickering and drama out of the way, and then that quick just build up to the concert. Because I think a lot of casual fans, if they're sitting through the whole thing, they're going to be going like, well, isn't this about a concert or an album, and is that going to happen?
It's such a broad sweeping thing, and it's going to require multiple viewings for me to even get my head around. It's such a blast of just information, visually, verbally, that just nobody's ever had. Like,
how gorgeous is that restoration of the film stock?
Amazing.
Oh my God. I don't think we ever thought we were going to get all this. I remember talking to you maybe October when the album re-release came out, and I went, like, oh, there's some tidbits, but I mean, I don't know what I was expecting it to be, like the ultimate basement tapes or something. Maybe one day there'll be just every little fart and that happen even with the office staff coming in and out of the door. I mean, who knows? I know that they had microphones and cameras just everywhere, but how great was it to start with the Quarrymen in spite of all the danger?
I thought that was a great move on Jackson's part to give the non-Beatle fanatic a great, just quick crash course survey and, okay, here's everything that happened before let the Get Back sessions, like as quick as he could make it, but it was classy and well done, and it was that crash course that any viewer would need that's not like us that knows it all already, so that was a great touch on his part for doing that. I like the calendar, the way he had the calendar up there for people that are really into dates and the history. Like, we had it all in front of us there, and
that's a good stopping point too for a lot of people that I've talked to who watched a few of the episodes already, that when they were seeing the animatic for the day flipping over, they're like, this is the time I'm going to go to the restroom or grab a drink, because I know it's a natural stopping point, because
that's right.
The thing was kind of unwieldy, and at a certain point it's like, you got to come up for air. You got to be able to do your live your life and stuff. So I thought that was very smart on Jackson's part to give it a natural kind of breathing room. And going back to what you were saying about the flashback, they really hammered home about Brian Epstein's death was really like right even before they got into the midst of everything, that their father figure was dead and they were kind of adrift. And you and I talked about this before about McCartney kind of assuming that mantle, but yeah, it's just interesting that he died in 67 and by 69 they were kind of spinning their wheels, each one wanted them to do something different. But so I know you took some notes, I took some notes, so
yeah.
I don't know if you want to, how you want to do this. Like I kind of broke mine into I took notes for each part, and then I would watch the second part and took notes, and I don't have too much for the third part. But do you want to start, or?
Well, we could just, talk about whatever you have written down, and I wrote a few bullet points type thing. I was too busy just like stunned and shocked and like I could barely even think to grab a pen. But like I actually watched part one twice.
Wow.
I watched part one on day one, and then on day two I watched part one again, and then I watched part two, and then I watched part three. So that's my history there. But I want to say one thing at the beginning is because there were so many hours of audio, that Jackson did a pretty good job of giving us like when you throw a stone along the top of a creek, when you watch the stone skip, like he hit a lot of selections, and the song title would pop up in the corner, and he'd play like 10 seconds worth of them going over an old cover or whatever they were doing. And there were so many titles that the Beatles hit. Even if it was just a quick mess around for a couple of minutes, they'd hit an old title and they'd mess around. And they have to be like over 200 titles that they hit. And like he did a good job of just quickly getting those in there, just to give us a sense of everything they were trying
identifying
out. And I was really struck by the number. And if you noticed that the credits at the end, especially like the number of like just improvisational things that they would just start doing, and it would pop up underneath. He'd come up with some title for it, and then it would say Lennon McCartney, and in the credits, like it had it like listed there too. So there's all these new song titles that are in their Lennon McCartney catalog now that were just them messing around, and now they're officially released now. So their songbook just grew by about another 20 or 30 titles or whatever.
I know. And to go back to what I was saying before, I don't ever want to bag on what their release plan for the music was for this package. But I just, after seeing the documentary and you go, oh my God, there's so much stuff that I feel like they just pushed out the audio really quick in October, and they could have held back, or done 3 albums worth of unreleased material. So that still may be in the bag. But I gotta tell you, one of the things that made me laugh right off the bat were, those are just the Hare Krishnas.
Oh, that was like, funny too.
Who gets access to just come into this thing that's supposed to be in at Twickenham, the film studio where they were first recording? It's just like, even if it wasn't the Beatles, it's still like a working studio. Like, who vets people to come in and out? They're just coming in, and who knows who these people could have been? That, to me, that kind of freaked me out, going like, there's 20 feet away, there's like 4 or 5 people that no one even knows their name.
And it's funny you mention that, because it's consistent with George. He had brought in Eric Clapton as a guest, and Billy Preston, of course, and then the Hare Krishnas. So it's interesting that George seemed to be the one, even before John, who obviously with Yoko, which we'll get to that very interesting Yoko Ono stuff in this movie too. But it's interesting how George like wanted to break up the monotony of just those 4, and he would bring other people in. And then the Yokos, like, the number one takeaway for me, Eric, in this whole thing is like, I'm shaking my head and I'm like, 50 years of people writing, including me, I'm guilty, like of people writing about how the Let It Be sessions or the Get Back sessions were miserable and they hated it and they were miserable. And no, not the case. I mean, they had their, not the case, man. We saw firsthand 8.5 hours of them having a fucking, sorry, excuse my French,
you can swear,
having a having a blast, and they love each other and they were having fun. And it's like, that's what that was all about. Like, of course they had their little, like, you know,
it was
tension
the
was
press.
there, but
it was the British press that twisted all that on Yoko. But after the fact, in 1970, because you and I know the history, that it was actually, you know, Harrison. Well, I mean, Ringo was already going to make a movie, so he had very limited time because he was getting ready to film The Magic Christian with Peter Sellers. And Peter Sellers showing up was great. But it was
he had
Harrison
nothing to say.
who left first, right? And then, you know, Lennon's not even, he's like, and I thought that, you know, in history that Lennon was pissed and Lennon said, well, fine, we'll just get Clapton. But no, it was a couple of days later when they were like, well, we've got to finish the songs. I guess if he doesn't come back by Tuesday, maybe we'll reach out to Clapton. But it wasn't like he was pissed. I think it was just like a sense of, what do we do? And
practical. It was a practical observation.
And then
if we have to, we will.
Yeah, and then Lennon left quietly at the end of '69, and Paul had already recorded his solo album before the Let It Be album that Phil Spector produced was kind of like the contractual obligation album,
right?
That you know. But to go back to part one here, one note that I had from watching part one, and you can agree or disagree, but those guys were such a unit, even through, you know, the White Album, arguably, and you can see the footage of them going to India and everything. But George Martin looks miserable because he's so used to being the daddy. He's so used to being in control, setting the time. You know, we work office hours, you know, 9 to noon, take a lunch, and then 1 to 5, and then, you know, you're out of here. None of this take the clocks off the wall crap. And he's just sitting there and he's just like, what am I doing here?
You know, I thought that about him too, before watching this 8.5 hour thing. But, you know, there was plenty of footage of him smiling and just going
later,
with the flow
but just initially, like when they first got here, he like, what is this project? And Mike, so I think he was kind of also secretly kind of not pissed, but kind of,
this is not how I like to do
worried that he had to defer to Michael Lindsay Hogg as kind of like the general, and Michael Lindsay Hogg couldn't get definitive decisions from the Beatles, so it was just literally going round and round of, what are we doing? Let's rehearse the songs. Well, are we going to do a concert? Sure. What are we doing? Let's rehearse the songs. And
you know what? It's crazy. And one thing, when you sit, because I'm going to watch these multiple times, but I tell you what, man, when you sit and listen to the Beatles having a conversation, just the four Beatles, like, there is something very non-linear about how they communicate with each other. Like, they'll just say sentences out loud into the room and you're not sure, and then somebody else will say a sentence and you're not sure if there's continuity there, or you're like, they're not effective communicators when they're talking to each other. Like,
especially Lennon, I got the feeling talks well, because when Yoko was there, I got the feeling he was also kind of performing for Yoko, where he would kind of talk at people to get laughs out of her. And, you know, he was going in and out of these different characters and funny voices. And I feel like he always did that. That's just him, his personality. But
and then like Paul would get like uptight about something that he wanted, but he wouldn't articulate what it was that he he would try to articulate it.
And you could see his jaw kind of clench. And but going back to the music, you know, they did a lot of covers, but the original stuff, there were so many different permutations of each song. Like Two of Us started off as more of an upbeat rock and roll song with Ringo really crashing on the drums, and I didn't like it. I mean, I didn't like that the acoustic version, but it was just
I like the fast one personally, but that's just me, because something about those harmonies really sail.
That's true.
in that faster one. It's just fascinating to watch that process. You're right about how it does go through those different, it evolves and changes. And I love to see how By the Rooftop, they're so confident and so tight because they played them so many times. And, you know, as a musician too, like it's tough because you have to go through a song so many times, but as you go, and they even spoke about this too in the film, they talked about the burnout factor of if we do the same songs all these times and we lose the fire, we lose the passion, you know, kind of thing.
But it's incredible that they wrote the songs, rehearsed them,
Yeah.
and then did a concert all within a month.
Yeah, that
And
was.
filmed it. It's like,
Yeah.
what did I do this weekend? But one thing I wanted to touch on that really stood out to me, because of the 50-year history of looking back on what and just little kernels of information we've gotten over the years about the time period, is they literally showed each other magazines and newspaper clippings about, you know, like, you know, Harrison and Lennon going to blows, and that's like, it says right there, like, never happened.
Yeah.
Who is saying that? Is the reporter who was never there just selling sensationalism to sell papers?
Exactly.
And
like
can
you
imagine
said,
living a decade of your life like that?
you could see why they wanted out. I mean, it's not like they had any particular beef with each other, the four of them. They just had other things. They wanted to start their lives with their wives and buy a farm on Scotland and do a solo album. George even brings up, I'm sure you saw it, I think you got that far.
Yeah.
Where George is like, I could just do an album, you know,
of my own
why
stuff.
don't I? Yeah, exactly. And he's like suggesting that the Beatles continue, but he just does a side album. You know, so they didn't like have animosity. They loved each other very much.
You know, where it's like, I don't, as long as I get my 4 songs on the album, I don't care. And then I can go and do my own album and tour that. And then a year and a half later, the Beatles can get back together and do an album and consider that, you know, like the mothership kind of thing, like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. But I do want to touch on something else that you said about the communication is, I agree with that, you know, the lack of, or just the weird communication.
Right.
But they definitely had a group sense of humor and inside jokes, and they were all goofballs. And I thought this version of the story showed that immensely. And before, the other version of Let It Be was just this dour drudgery. And
that's right.
Just hours and hours of them just, you know, wrapping their shirts around their heads and running around the room so that their arms flailing around, being, you know. I thought that was great.
Oh, it was so great. It was great. It's amazing, like, you know, my friend Charlie, you know Charlie, right?
Yeah.
He commented just today on Facebook saying something about how he has no respect for Michael Lindsay Hogg, because if you had that treasure trove of material and you only got that, whatever that was, 80-minute drudgery fest that you just described, if you only got that out of it, then you must not be that great of a film editor or producer if that's what you got out of it. You couldn't have done it any better than that. I don't know.
I think he was an opportunist. I think he saw the cracks and the arguments, and that's how they were going to promote it. And it wasn't going to come out until after they broke up anyway. And so it was clearly, you know, re-edited in hindsight to just, you know, put a magnifying glass on all of that. It wasn't, you know, because it's like, wait a minute, a year ago, none of this would have been talked about, or, you know, things like that. But I do like the fact that they went back to some of their older songs that they hadn't recorded, like One After 909, and then you see them playing it, and it's just pure joy. You know, that's just like, hey, remember this when we were like 17, we wrote this song, and how fun this is, and they're all happy, and, you know, they're all being team players. And that brings me to a point about Lennon. I'm still on the first episode here. I feel like he came in because he was so globbed onto Yoko, and I think they were in a legal battle about her trying to get divorced.
Right.
That he was very underprepared with new material, but I still feel like he's a team player because he literally is stepping over and, you know, helping Harrison work on, you know, something. And
All of them, all of those guys, just, whenever it wasn't their song, George working on Paul's songs, John working on Paul's songs, like, they were like all in. From what I saw, they were like, working out their parts. George would always be the one to count and get back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, every
Yeah.
time he was all there, he wasn't like, oh, we got to do this again. No, there wasn't any of that. Like, they were all a team, and they knew it, and they knew how good they were, and despite all the crap, and Ringo said it in later years in the anthology interviews and stuff, he's like, no matter what problem was happening outside, once we got that red light on, all the bullshit went away, and we
Oh
were
yeah, it's like you're there to do a job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll bring this up to you because it's something I thought about several times watching all the parts, but because a lot of the songs that they rehearsed ended up 6 months later on Abbey Road, what had to have been the line of thinking or something between the Beatles and George Martin of going, I mean, me personally, I like Abbey Road better I think it's just has a re-listenability
Right.
quality. It's just a higher quality recording overall
Yes, I would
than
agree with
Let It
that.
Be. And I think the songs individually are miles above the Let It Be stuff. But it's like, if they were already writing all that stuff at the same time, is that something we'll never know? Where it's like, she came in through the bathroom window and something, and these songs are clearly being written, Her Majesty, and it's just like, who said, well, we're gonna save those? Well, wasn't there impetus to always use the best material at the time for that album?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that there's so much. All three of them had so many just songs in the wind in their mind that they were partially done. Some of those things, like Her Majesty, that might have been the very first time all those guys were hearing it. So, and I know a lot of those were written in India, but they were just sort of like, partially written, and maybe they were bringing in little pieces in to just show the guys, and but that's a good question, and a lot of like Give Me Some Truth, that was a segment
Right.
that
I
blew
never
my
knew that
mind.
McCartney worked on that. Did you?
Yeah, no, I didn't know
cow.
that
I mean, and he kept the lid on that for 50 freaking years.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Yeah, so it's an interesting. It's just a question of timing, and like it's kind of like relationships. A song is going to be born when it's ready, or it won't be born at all. Kind of a relationship. The timing has got to be right in order for it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think some songs were just kind of in that zygote phase of, I've got 4 chords and a verse. What do you guys think of this?
I wrote a funny thing down about George Harrison here.
Okay.
I don't remember what Beatles song they were working on. It's I think it was one of John's songs or something. But George Harrison starts saying, we should lay a melody over top, like, I'll be there with the da 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 da. Do you remember that part where he he pulls this Motown piece out of his head, and he's like, why don't we superimpose that over top of this Beatles song or something? And they don't wind up doing it, but I wrote this down in my notebook because it was like this interesting little foreshadow of George Harrison trying to pull over a Motown or pull some other song, and ta-da, you get sued for
right.
He's so fine, doodle-line, doodle-line.
My sweet Lord, yeah.
yeah, and it just sort of struck me as like he didn't really realize that he was doing that, but he was like flirting with that same situation or something.
Yeah, it's flirting with disaster. I mean, it's just, you never think about those things. But one unsung hero that I didn't really even know was so integral to the process, I never heard his name mentioned other than just in credits for those albums, was Glenn Johns, the engineer. And my God, it's like he was really involved, especially in the early parts of the sessions. I think he had to leave and go record another band or something. But yeah, he's like on his hands and knees and, stringing mics and cable. And at one point he's standing over McCartney's shoulder and he goes, but what if, he's playing Let It Be, and he's like,
right.
And then John's like, or maybe Glenn Johns is just going to arrange this song for us.
Yeah, he actually suggests to Paul, what if you try this? Down, 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 down. That part with just the piano. And Paul's like, oh, okay, right, yeah. So he actually helps him like arrange the song, like you said. Yeah. And I was surprised too. I had never seen a picture of Glyn Johns. I was expecting Glyn Johns to be some 50-year-old guy or something, but he was like this young, hip London
Well, yeah,
guy
I
or
had seen
whatever.
footage of him from
Yeah.
when he produced the first couple of Eagles albums,
Oh, wow.
um, which is pretty bad detriment to the Eagles because they were trying to sound a lot like Led Zeppelin and the Who when they first started trying to record. And
Oh,
he
wow.
goes, and I remember there's a quote where Glenn Johns is talking to Glenn Frey, and he goes, "Look, mate, I've just spent like the last 10 years recording all those bands in England, and you ain't them." But then,
Good.
he did stick around and help them find that kind of country rock harmony. So he
That
has
sounds
the
like
ear. He has
they
the
needed to
ear.
hear that then. It sounds like they needed to hear that honest,
And that's what you
constructive
want. I
feedback
mean,
right then. Yep.
because if not, it's like any young band, whether it's the Beatles or somebody starting off right now, it's like you got to have that honest feedback because the the honest feedback you don't want is the audience booing you. Yeah, so going back to that first part, I also have down that, just to reiterate, just way too many hangers on, just people just showing up. I mean, I know Peter Sellers was getting ready to film the movie there, so that made sense. He would come to the film studio. But like the Hare Krishnas and like, oh, this is just some dude and he's hanging out having sandwiches with us. Like, what? And then it's like Yoko's there, and then Linda shows up, and then Maureen shows up, and it's like, it'd be one thing that's like they show up a few minutes before lunch to go out to lunch or to get at the end of the day to go out to dinner, but they're gonna be freaking bored out of their mind.
Yeah, it's a fine line because I think the Beatles probably wanted there to be some other people in the room just so they could have a sense of audience bouncing it off of some other person that's in the room, not a technical audience, but like somebody who's there. So they don't just have to look at the same four and feel isolated. There's a sense of people around them.
Right. So maybe that way you're not turning around and going like, oh, you again.
Yeah. But there's like stories about Jimi Hendrix used to do that and it turned into like a party and work wouldn't get done. And, it could be a problem for sure. But, and then how about the Yoko scenes, like anybody who like, they were all perfectly nice to her and she was like not causing any disruption. And the only time she gets on the mic is when there's somebody not there. Like there's never all four
left
Beatles.
And they were just trying to fill up the day with jamming. Right. And she didn't have any lyrics written for any songs, so she's just making vocal voices.
That whole scene, man, when George leaves and the three of them and Yoko it's like they snap. It's like all that tension just snaps and they just like go, hey, they just like go, wah! Like Paul's like hanging on the monkey bars, like he's hanging, and they're just like thrashing. All the rules go; they're just completely free. Like it's like a complete relieving, a catharsis in that segment right after George leaves. It's so, and I had read about that, but the fact that it's captured and preserved now in the public domain is just blows my mind. That was the mythologic stuff of mythology that nobody would ever see. There was audio of it, but now it's there and you could see it. Like,
and the fact that there was no blow up, there was no argument. It was just when he finished the song and they were getting ready to break for lunch, he just quietly put his guitar in his case, put his coat on, politely came up to the other three, shook their hands, and said, "Right, well, I'll be leaving now, and I won't be coming back."
Yeah, and I have a theory about why he did that too. I have a theory, which and you're right, it was so subtle and passive aggressive and out of the clear blue sky. But I actually rewatched, because like I said, I watched part one twice and this helped me. That morning, there's that segment with Dick James, the music publisher, and they're sitting there going over all this list. Dick James must have just acquired a bunch of new titles that John and Paul, with their music publishing, are now owning the rights to all these weird songs, and they're naming all these weird titles. And so John and Paul, as we all know, they got the lion's share of the royalties because they were the main songwriting force. George got some, not nearly as much, which is why George was so acutely, his mind was on his money and his money was on his mind all the time because he's got John and Paul there who are like, multimillionaires. And John Lennon was even quoted in an interview in 1969 or 70. He says, and I quote, George and Ringo are practically penniless. Like, he said that about his two bandmates because they got nowhere near the same mechanical royalties from the songs.
Right.
So when George walks in, he walks in a little late and he sits down and he shakes Dick James's hand. And Ringo says, George, would you like to see what you own 0.1% share? And like, which is Ringo's way of saying, oh, or whatever. Look at us, George, me and you, we're like, we get nothing, and it was, Ringo was joking about it a little bit, but I think that planted the seed in George's mind, that first thing when he gets there that morning. And then later, like while they're working on the songs that morning, like Paul shoots down a couple of George's ideas or something, which is par for the course. It wasn't unusual. Paul wasn't being a dick about it. It was just like another day of George piping up with something, and Paul in his like ambiguous way, like not really hearing it or not picking up on, So I think between that royalty things like stewing away in his mind, George is probably just thinking, why am I bothering? I'm doing all this work. I'm putting in the same effort as these guys and I'm getting bupkis for it. Like, he's like, why am I bothering? I'm leaving. That's my theory, because money was so acutely important to him. Like, he like money grubs a couple other times. Who's going to pay for all this? He brings that up a couple times throughout the course of the 9 hours. And it's crazy how they must have, those secret meetings, man. It's a shame those weren't better cataloged, and because they got them back somehow. And I guarantee, not guarantee, but my educated guess is that it has something to do with money.
Oh yeah.
Sure, like something in Here Comes the Sun. Thank goodness for him that he did come back, because those were his two biggest Beatles songs, but without a doubt. And those were going to be coming down in the future. Those weren't even logged yet, so they must have promised him an A side, which Something and Come Together was like a double A side. It's like, it's considered, but they got him back, and he came back and he was just as ready to work and enthusiastic as he was ever before he left. So they must have done something. He got over it.
I'm gonna flip over to part two.
Go ahead.
Because, that was kind of the end of part one with Harrison leaving. But I wanted to touch on this, which I didn't even know that the film crew did this, which until I saw this version, which was planting the microphones in like the flower pots and in the tapestries and the light fixtures. But as horrible as an invasion of privacy as that is, that conversation with Lennon and McCartney, and they cleared out that cafe and the cafeteria, and they just sat there, and McCartney is like literally reading Lennon the riot act, and he's basically saying, he's like, George will not come back unless you assume the big brother leadership role in the band that you had, that you've kind of ceded and just kind of let go, because George loves you like a brother.
Wow.
And he said that he's emphatically, he's like, George will not come back unless it's seen that you really want him back in your band, because the Beatles were John's band from the Quarrymen days, and George wanted to be in the Quarrymen, because he was in awe of John and John's personality, and he was just so comfortable around people, and and we never would have had that, because immediately after that, when George comes back, Paul just is really withdrawn. He's not pointing fingers. He's not, talking about takes. And Lennon is really like, hey, let's go through I've Got a Feeling again. Or, George, do you want like a slide guitar on that for you, Blue? And let's order that in there. And it's like, it had to look like it was all Lennon's idea, because I think Harrison was just done with McCartney. I mean, for that time.
Yeah, that's astute. That's astute,
microphones.
Man. Yeah, because I've only seen that part two once, and it blew my mind. 2 hours and 54 minutes with the flower pot and everything else. And then in part three, Ringo farts and he like announces it. I was beside myself. I lost it.
I thought that was great.
And he's like, it's such a gentleman. He's like, I faulted. I just thought you should know.
And then McCartney's like,
It's just so much. It's amazing. Yeah. So that's a great. I didn't even pick up on that, man. I was too busy.
Go back
my
and
mind
watch that, and it's just them. The camera's focusing on a flower pot, and they have the conversation going over top of it. But
yep.
At the beginning of part 2, Ringo still wanted the documentary to come out, even if the band broke up. Whereas I think Lennon wanted to. I think in the original version of Let It Be, they don't ever talk about George leaving. Mm-hmm. They don't even show that in that 80-minute.
Right.
I have to say, I don't think I'll ever watch the 80-minute version again. There's no reason to.
Well, first of all, like it's not even out in a decent format as far as I know, and after this thing lays it to waste, it's embarrassing.
Obliterates it.
Yeah. So who knows if there's even going to be a demand for the
maybe Beatles completists, but I've never been someone who's had to order things from other countries to feel like I'm special when I've got something.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, I've got another one here.
Go ahead.
So Paul didn't want to push John because John was way more into Yoko and being in her sphere than participating in the Beatles. Even though he was a team player and he was showing up, he knew he couldn't railroad him. The only time was when he read him that riot act about George leaving. Kind of like, dude, if you don't step up, like we are going to lose George permanently,
Yeah. There's that scene where Paul's sitting and they're just having a little sitting down meeting, and away from the instruments, and he says what you outlined right there, like about he's gonna want to go be with Yoko, and he's like accepting it. He's like not crazy about it, but he's accepting. He's not saying anything mean about it or slighting them at all.
It's just a reality, and they're trying to unravel it and work their way through it. And then there's the scene where Paul and Ringo are just sitting there and talking about things. And they don't want the band to break up. You can tell Ringo wants to do his acting on the side, but he still wants to be in the Beatles. I think that's foreshadowing, talking about the publishing, because man, is he really excited to work on Octopus's Garden.
Yeah.
He's like, wait, George is doing this. I should probably think about covering my own ass here. And there was I still think John and Paul really enjoyed writing together.
Oh, they had such moments together in that film. It's so beautiful to see. Through all the repeated takes of I've Got a Feeling and Two of Us in particular, those are the two that they really gel together. And of course, Don't Let Me Down with the harmony section where they sing together there. And they just sang as well together then as they ever had. And they were having fun. And it's all there now, cataloged in public domain for anybody who ever thought that they were miserable, including myself. And I'm going to have to go revise my book now, and
oh darn, we'll have to get the get back version of the new book.
Oh God.
Well, going back to talking about the guests dropping by, I feel like when Peter Sellers was there and John was just ranting and being a buffoon, that he was very shy and kind of befuddled because he's like, well, what are you guys doing here? Oh, we don't know.
Yeah, and I think they were cutting into his starting the Magic Christians, so he might have been annoyed by that. He might have been
maybe.
Like, look,
they were all friends,
Yeah, it's speculation.
But you could tell he was like, oh, am I on camera? Why am I on camera? What's going on here? Like, okay, I'm gonna go now.
Yeah, because he would probably have to get like clearance from his people, and there's all this business aspect. I thought it was clever of going back to the Alan Klein. Did you mention Alan Klein yet?
Not on this video, yeah.
Okay, yeah. The bit about, Jackson does a good job of dropping in that foreshadowing of bringing in Alan Klein as this new name. Lennon's like smitten with him because that's how Lennon operated. He would get smitten with somebody like the Maharishi, and he would go like a Pied Piper into that person's world. Later, it would be Arthur Janov and his primal scream therapy, and then would be like these political causes and all these things that Lennon would sort of get enamored with quickly and fall for and run toward. But then he would be like, as soon as he felt like he was done with it, he'd walk away and act like it was never a big deal. But,
right.
So he's saying he's a fascinating guy. They're introducing Alan Klein. They're planting that seed because the true the true turmoil, doesn't start until after the Get Back sessions are over and the business crap really gets going with Alan Klein versus the Eastmans, who Paul wanted. And that hadn't really gotten started just yet. I think they had their first meeting with Klein during this film, and it was too early in that yet in order for that to get truly started yet. So again, my takeaway is the Let It Be sessions were not when they were breaking up. It's not a band breaking up, not yet.
I mean, there are seeds planted, like we were
seeds
just saying.
For sure.
For sure, there were cracks, but I mean, all four of them were happy to come back. And to go back to what you were saying before about that second meeting with George, at that second meeting is when they decided to cancel the television special and to relocate to Apple Studios, which just the level of performances went.
Oh yeah.
And they were so much happier, and it was warmer in there. They were in some giant cavernous film studio with, a cement floor, and folding chairs. It was just a much more positive, creative atmosphere.
And the band, when they finally bring it to fruition with the rooftop concert, like I find myself asking at the end of that, why on earth did they not want to do more dates? It wouldn't even have to have been a tour. They could have just taken that and done. They were struggling with, they were too huge to play small shows, which I think they would have preferred. So they came up with a very clever way on the roof, because they could play to the surrounding blocks and people can they couldn't even really see them, which adds to their mythos, if you ask me. I think I might have mentioned it in the book, to where they're technically playing live. It's technically a live performance, but people can't really see them.
No.
Because they're too high up on their Olympus there, and you can't really see. They're just concepts, to most people. So
remember the Beatles when we could see them on television?
So I just wonder, they were so good, and the band was so tight, and Harrison's lead work on One After 909 alone is just like, he's at the top of his game, and Paul's at the top of his rock voice, and Ringo's rocking, and they were at the top of their form.
Billy Preston.
And of course.
When he showed up, it was like they all gave a shit suddenly.
Yeah. So I just wonder why, they didn't try to do that set a couple of times.
Ringo had to go film The Magic Christian, so he was going to be busy for a month or two.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, Lennon, I think he had something going on. I think he was going to go off on his honeymoon or something, right? Weren't they going to go get married?
That's right. Yeah.
And then they went to Montreal, I think, and had the bed in or something.
That's right. So they were just wanting to do their own thing. They had been, as George Martin said, incarcerated together for nearly a decade, is his words. So they were like, what? And then Lennon later said, I never kept the same musicians for very long after the Beatles, because it's kind of like when you play tennis with the same person for 10 years, you learn all their moves and you're like, I need to play tennis with somebody else.
Yeah, it's somebody that's going to teach you something new, or
right,
or to fall into the joy that is the unexpected.
That's right.
Because, like we were talking about earlier, like turn your chair around and face another player and you're like, oh, you again.
And it's such a full circle moment, this film, because you hit it on the head a second ago when you said things are getting stale and they have to innovate. And that's how they were able to keep it fresh and fun for all those years with Rubber Soul, Revolver, Peppers. Like that main sweet spot there was them just innovating and finding, and they were surprising themselves. And it was a perfect mix of spontaneity and craft. Like they had their craft and their knowledge, but they had to constantly allow for surprise they had to also be surprised. So that's like, you have to walk that line between preparation and being surprised. Right. And when they're sitting there playing some of those, like that old, like Two of Us is like an Everly Brothers type vibe. It seems like they had come back to square one again, and they're reminiscing about the Hamburg and all this stuff and all the oldies and stuff. Maybe they're sitting there realizing in their heart of hearts, we've been around in a circle, and now what? What's the point, or something?
Well, the main change, I think, was the end of Revolver, which I think is the invention of techno with Tomorrow Never Knows, with the drum loop, but then realizing, oh, we don't have a way to do this live yet. Now the rest of Revolver, we can do that all of these songs live in concert, not a problem. It's a 4-piece band. You know, one of us will just play piano, it's fine, or keyboard. But with Sgt. Pepper, it was like, no, 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 this is the performance.
Right.
This is the concert. You're getting a 40-minute or however long it is performance. Right. And then after that, it was like, okay, well, then they had to realize, okay, now we're competing with Cream and Bands of the Day, like the White Album. And, you know, they did other things too, like Magical Mystery Tour. But I think that they really hit their zenith with Abbey Road, because it was like, these songs can be performed live, but the studio craft is still incredibly high. It was like anything, it was higher than anything in the studio craft probably since Sgt. Pepper, but you can play those songs live for the most part, you know?
Yep.
So I think I covered that, you know, that the recording in the Apple Studios was a huge shot in the arm for them. The sound equipment was abysmal, and then George Martin got EMI to replace all their equipment at Apple from EMI over the weekend. That's how you know you're in the freaking Beatles.
Yeah.
The producer will pay, the studio and the record label will pay the engineers to come in over the weekend and get it to their specification. That never happens. I don't care who you are right now, you know?
That's great.
Billy Preston, like I said, he elevated all the performances. It was just it gave the soul. Obviously, the songs just were limp for that.
Yeah,
I love that they were sitting around making fun of the footage of the Maharishi that they shot in India, and they were because, like you were saying, Lennon was so smitten with him, and then here we are, less than a year later, and he's just like, oh, sexy Sadie, and oh yeah, this guy's a trickster, you know.
Wow.
I think that this is the first time that watching something that I realized that the person who came up with the rooftop concert was Glenn Johns and not one of the actual Beatles.
Oh, okay.
Because they'd come over, I think he and Michael Lindsay Hogg come over to Paul, and you see Paul sitting there, Paul's got his hands up like this. All of a sudden, you just see his eyes just kind of go.
That's, okay, right.
Like,
that's
good.
What
do you think of that? We're the bloody Beatles.
It was a great idea. What a great idea. I want to, let me say one more thing about how they loved each other. You know, I was so taken by their relationship. Like there's, I love the segment where George is showing them I, Me, Mine. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And he's describing how it's the waltz time or whatever, and like John, and they're standing, all four of them are kind of standing in a circle there, and John Lennon starts like giving him a hard time. He's like, oh, we're a rock and roll group, well, we don't
do waltzes.
And he's like, he's making fun, he's kind of making fun of him, and George is like a little dejected, like, well, I don't care if you don't want it, and so George plays it off. You could tell he's maybe a little hurt by their non-reaction to it.
Right.
But then a few seconds later, they cut to a scene where the band is playing it, and John and Yoko are waltzing, and the other three Beatles are playing it, and it sounds great, sounds already tight and awesome. So they're like, they were just messing around and ribbing with each other. Clearly, they were going to work on the song.
I think that's Lennon's sense of humor. He's very, he's a very sharp, acidic, cutting kind of. Yeah. Almost to the point of being a bully, but I think that's just the way he toughened himself up, not having a dad. So.
And I think that one didn't get worked on further because they didn't have another section yet.
Right.
Like it would be the following January 2nd or something when they recorded. It was the very last Beatles song recorded. And that's when they came up with the other part that's not present in the film at all. That came later. So that's why they didn't work on it anymore.
That makes sense. I did like so I guess we can move on to part 3.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have, like I said, too many notes for that, but what I've got so far is just, you know, seeing George come and help Ringo write Octopus's Garden.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like he quickly looks at the camera and he's like, screw it, I'm going to help my friend. Because there's something there. It's a catchy song, and Ringo's sharing something. And there's that old Family Guy bit where Ringo comes in and says,
we'll put it on the refrigerator.
And it's like, and then Paul says, Oh, that's lovely. Oh, John, look at that. Let's go over here and put it on the fridge with the others.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's true. He did probably was terrified of coming in with those guys and showing them anything other than just his standard country rock covers that were like his sweet spot. But I mean, that's very cool that we have footage of them actually working on it, you know?
Yeah.
But like I said, you know, the band is much more engaged at Apple. I mean, it was almost like a different band, like the Beatles of the White Album of the previous project. It was like suddenly they were back. Um, and what I said about part one about George Martin looking miserable because he was just kind of, I don't know. But in part three, when he's at Apple and he's sitting right next to John, and John turns around and then George is going like, you know, continue on with that bit. It was like, I don't know what it is, but Lennon has like this warm kind of like smile of like, I got daddy's approval.
Yeah.
And it's like they needed that, you know, they didn't have Brian Epstein anymore, but they needed George Martin. They needed that person that was just like, that was on the same level that could tell them no. Because they were already so famous, so well known. They had everything they wanted for money, every material possessions. The producer's still the one that's got to be like, I'm sorry, that take was shit. We're not going to use it. You guys are fucking around like a bunch of monkeys on cocaine. We're not going to do that. Like, get your act together, you know. I still felt like there were too many distractions. There were still too many people coming and going, but you know, they were able to focus through and get through. I mean, the kids were showing up, and that's just life. But the footage of Lennon and McCartney dancing together, that was great during playback and stuff.
Oh yeah, just in the control room in general.
Yeah.
You have a few more minutes to go. You're gonna love it. As soon as they're done with the rooftop concert, they show everybody crammed into that control room listening back. They're all listening back to what they have just done. And just the sheer smiles and energy in the room is just so, it's just so beautiful to see. Like they know that they slayed it, that they sounded good, and they have good recordings, and they're just excited, and you see their everything, the energy is so positive, and that just sealed it for me. Like they did not come out of, I don't understand like all the red tape that kept it on a shelf for a year. Like it had nothing to do with, like, the music was good and they liked it.
Well, they put out a couple of the songs as singles. So what was the deal? Did we ever know why that project was shelved for a year? Was it tied up in the film, like it being a film?
That was probably part of it, you know. And I just think they felt like, maybe they felt like the roof was just like this, that's the end. Like it felt like such a finale that nobody wanted to go back and listen back to all those hours. So that's why they offloaded it to some outsider, Phil Spector, and they're like, we don't want to mess with this. Like they just didn't have the energy to go back over it all. Because it was tedious. I'm sure it felt like going. That's another reason why I think they probably, at the end of it, even though there were its fun moments, the film really brings out the fun parts. They went to work every day, Monday through Friday, including a couple of weekend days, for a full month. They're the Beatles. Like when you're as huge as the Beatles, you should not have to feel, or probably in their minds, why do I feel like I have to get up and go to work every day? This is not why I got famous. You know, like.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they just didn't have the energy to go back and
or maybe it's just like the same thing with writing or painting or anything that sculpting. At a certain point, you're just like,
exactly,
it hurts too much. I need a change of scenery. I need fresh air. I need new stimuli.
Right.
I need to get the fuck out of Dodge and just live my life and then come back and then reassess. And then I think at a certain point it just brought up bad memories, so they didn't want to reassess, you know. I did like the footage of Harrison writing Old Brown Shoe, and I didn't realize Billy Preston was so involved with the writing of Old Brown Shoe. He was literally showing him chord shapes on the piano. Did Preston get a writing credit? I don't think so, which is bad. It's like, oh.
But George did use Billy for a session musician and touring partner for a chunk of the 70s. Billy appears on a lot of George's albums.
Okay, well, that's
good.
something.
Yeah, and I think later he gives him some credits down the road later. I think I'm pretty sure. I'm not up on George's solo career past the first 2 albums, because it just kind of like goes into this state of mediocrity to where it's not anything that really moves me that terribly, because even he himself started to look upon his solo career as just like a hobby, like gardening or auto racing or filmmaking.
Well, once you've got your mansion and you never run out of money, it's kind of like, well, I just want to exist. But I thought it was interesting too that before the rooftop concert, that Paul thinks that the rooftop concert ending will not be enough as a definitive ending or a wow factor for the movie. So what did Paul have in mind that he thought that the film needed more than that? I don't know.
I must have, I think I might have missed that. I'll have to think about that one, but no, it's definitely a wow. I don't know what he wants there. All those camera
they kept
angles.
wanting them to go to North Africa and film in that ancient Roman amphitheater by the ocean, and they were like, "What? Why?"
Yeah, which Pink Floyd does a similar thing with that Pompeii thing that they did, which I believe was like 71, maybe, or possibly 72.
I think it was right before Dark Side.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, I mean, it'll be just another live album. I mean, they did talk about putting people on a boat and then taking them on a boat from like Liverpool to the site of this majestical concert. And in my mind, I'm thinking, it sounds great on paper if you were writing a story or a movie, but the reality of it is a nightmare.
Right.
Then the Beatles are trapped on a boat.
And George says that. He's like, then I was stuck on a boat with all these people. No, I'm not doing it.
And then
it's insane.
like they're going to sit in these dirty, sandy amphitheater seats, and there aren't going to be refreshments. There's not going to be shade. All because the fucking director wants to get the shot of the sun coming up when they hit a certain chord in the bridge of the song.
Yeah.
I think it's like, and then Harrison's like, what if I don't hit the bloody chord? I also think that Lennon has said that, after the rooftop, that he wanted time off to recharge. He had been already burned out by the White Album. And then, a couple months later, they're right after the holidays, they're right back into doing this, and it's so funny because they didn't get that much time off because they were right back into making Abbey Road after that. So
I think that was, and I mentioned it in my book, that starting on January 2nd was not a good idea. That's not a good
at least
idea.
A couple of weeks.
Yeah. But again, that Magic Christian thing, they tried to squeeze it in there or something. They, between Revolver and Peppers, they took off like 5 months or something, like White Album's a double record. Why don't you take off 10 months or whatever,
Well, I think it's a different world, like, whereas now we're used to whatever your favorite rock bands are now, 3 years between album cycles.
That's right.
Writing, recording, put the album out, and then doing a year of touring, and then taking a year off. And in the 60s, if you did that, people would forget about you because it was such a singles-oriented culture. But yeah, I mean, I want to reiterate what you said too about George wanting a solo career and to still be in the Beatles. He's like, I could put full singles on the next 10 years of Beatles albums. I've got so many things just written,
Yeah.
One of my favorite things from the rooftop concerts where the cameras across the street. I mean, I love getting the man on the street shots and the reactions and the constable going like, "Oh, I'm not threatening you, but we're going to start arresting people."
Oh, that was so great. That those guys were like 21. They were so young, those cops.
I feel so bad because it's like they're just trying to do their job, but
and the people, the receptionists and the people in the office there in the entryway, they're like they're just being nondescript. They're not giving them their straight answer. They're trying to stall as much as they can, which I thought they were doing a good job of stalling.
Yeah.
And Mal Evans is like, well, they're doing a film, you know, like as if that's going to like make them say, oh, okay, well, if they're doing a film, then that's fine.
Oh, well, if you're only burning down part of Rome, that's fine.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really took to heart this time versus other YouTube or other clips I've seen, just those long tracking shots from the other building, zooming in on the band playing, because when they're in a room playing, it was still kind of that claustrophobic rehearsing, writing, being silly. But as you're on another space looking over at them, it does have that concert kind of vibe to it. And I really thought that was so smart that they put those cameras across the street. Because otherwise it's like people aren't going to know what it looked like because they're 5 stories down on the street. Just that there were some people actually thought, oh, are they just playing tracks through a PA of the new album? Oh, is this the new Beatles album? Because they couldn't see, so they had no idea. So what are your what are some more thoughts you've got? I know you've got a few things.
Oh, well, just I mean, we hit on most of it. I love how in the people in the street, they were like 90% of them were like, oh, I love it. I'm all in favor of it. Oh, this is great. Oh, you know, and I just love the sense of just the people. You could just tell they love the Beatles and they considered them part of their lives. And little did they know, you know, that this was the beginning of the end, but which is sad. But
the one guy
was beautiful.
It was great. The guy that kind of the stocky guy with the blonde hair and the suit. He was like, well, I don't like them. They're not what they were before.
Yeah, I wish they would have gotten more out of him. Like,
because it's like you had to really pull teeth. And then there was the lady was like, they interrupted me, and I was in the middle of my nap.
Yeah. And I got to say, one thing that blew my mind was the scene. Paul's wearing a canary yellow sweater, and he just writes "Get Back." Like you get to witness him just create "Get Back" out of thin air, which I'm sure is edited for time, and he was probably working on it for like a solid however long. But he just starts with the riff, and he starts and he's like mumbling, and then slowly it takes the shape. And then Lennon was late that morning, and by the time he walks in late, the 3 guys are already like starting to play it.
They've got a groove going.
Yeah. It was just born in that moment. Like, where else do you get to see a Beatles song born right straight from them like that? It's the way that he cut that, Jackson cut that, the way he did that, and the song title pops up right when it pops up. I love how, like, you already know it's "Get Back" for like the 2 minutes worth of it, and then boom, right when that song title pops up in the caption, you're like, yes, this is the moment when they knew that this was going to be a legit Beatles song, and they were going to work on it, and boom, "Get Back." You know, I just love it.
And I love that it went so well, so fast that they were talking about putting it out as a single, like right away.
Yeah. And they mentioned that canned heat, you know.
Oh yeah.
I'm going up the country, and like I can't do that, like that weird voice the guy uses, but McCartney, McCartney does that on "Get Back." Georgia was a man who thought he was a but he knew. I can't even do it.
I love that Lennon's like, are we sure that Tucson's in Arizona?
Oh yeah. I love
these little clips. And then Peter Jackson had a great quote a couple days ago where he said, yeah, it's probably exceedingly long, but I just thought if I didn't put everything in that I wanted to now that I thought was historically relevant, it would probably sit untouched again for another 50 years.
Right.
And to be fair, there are fallow points. There are bored people, flipping magazines and there's so much in the first episode of just random people walking around like, do I bring him the tea now or should I wait till later to ask them get their lunch order?
There were moments when Jackson's cutting was a little too frenetic, like where he was cutting too fast and a new song would start, cut, another song, cut, and it was just moving a little fast. I think he was trying to get as much in there as he could. And I started this hour by saying I like that about it. there were times when it was starting to get a little fast and furious, and claustrophobic a little bit. But overall, I'm glad he included everything that he did. And he said, I saw an interview too. He said that all that stuff, Apple has all that now, and if they want to release more, he anticipates they might call him up and say, hey, let's do another. Who knows what'll happen now, but this is enough for us to chew on for
years,
many years. Yeah.
My only thing is, I really feel like it was a disservice to the fans on the soundtrack side. Like, if you were going to re-release it, they should have just done what Robbie Robertson did with the Basement Tapes and just put out the complete, and you can even call it the complete Let It Be / Abbey Road sessions if you want to include everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Do we need, takes of people sneezing and feedback in the amps and, I don't know if we need all that, but we know from the footage that we watched, there is so much that's unreleased as a soundtrack,
Yeah, again, I feel like what you're saying that you would like to see happen, I'm sure it will.
It won't happen anytime because they just put this one out, but
yeah,
I don't know. I kind of feel like what you were saying the other day. This is probably the last big Beatles project
of Paul and Ringo's lifetime, for sure. It's the grand finale of their lifetime as far as Beatles legacy, Beatles, output. Because what else is there really? I mean, Carnival of Light,
where they may have gotten together in the 70s and not told anybody, and it's like, well, how can we prove any of that?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I mean, if there's anything more you want to add, let me know. I kind of think we kind of raced through this here, but we kind of, I think, touched on all the major points.
Yeah.
You got anything that you wrote down you want to cover?
I think I've really covered pretty much everything that I wanted to. Again, I'm just, I feel disappointed in just the historian aspect of how people got this so wrong for so long. That's one of my takeaways. Like, how did it come down through history as something so miserable and unhappy when clearly, like, I must have seen John Lennon smile, like genuinely, like I could tell a nervous fake smile, but all of them, and George too, all of them were like having fun, and they were just like a family and having fun and playing music, and and people just got that so wrong. And you commented on that, I agree that everybody likes the sad story because they like to.
Well, that's how they were able to. That's how Michael Lindsay Hogg was able to sell the movies, the documentary of the Beatles breaking up. So that's why, if it's just 80 minutes of drudgery, but I'm sure if that had been an hour and 45-minute movie, there'd be a lot of stuff that we've already seen of people smiling, having a good time, dancing together. I love seeing like Yoko and Linda together, high-fiving and giggling and sharing like snacks and just acting like two girlfriends, just hanging out, waiting for their husbands to get done playing field hockey or whatever.
That was great. Yeah. Great stuff, man. So I'll have to watch it about, another 5 or 10 times, which I will do.
Part 3. There's just so much for me to get through this weekend, and then the Peter failure and stuff. But man. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up, but go ahead and let the people know where they can find you and hold up your tome. Your book there.
So it's Calling Me Back Again, the Beatles Records at 50. I'm very proud of this.
You should be.
8 years in the making. But part of me now wishes I would have held back before this Peter Jackson. Although
there could also be another book from Gian Saja in the future about the Beatles.
That's funny. I'm just going to have to write some sort of like an addendum section about this Peter Jackson, because I can't. There's too much to say. I mean, there's going to be so much new Beatles. Just the way people view the Beatles and the legacy of the history and the mythology, all of that is just completely rewritten. At least this chapter of their career has to be rewritten. That's my final word.
And then, you know, just that simple quote from Harrison is that it's sad to know that the band could have gone on for another 10 or 15 years, because if they would all been given a year to go do their solo projects, and then we'll, like I said, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and then we'll reconvene and we'll do a Beatles album, and then we'll, you know, everybody can do their solo tours and work with whoever. And then it's like you were saying, like everybody will bring their own experiences into the band family, and it's like, well, I worked with this guy and he showed me this great new voicing with his chord, or
there you go,
you know,
that's it. And Yes did that in the mid 70s. They were at the height of their fame career, you know, they were at the height of their powers, and they all took a year off. Everybody did a solo album, and then they came back and were Yes again. So they did that idea, you know, and it worked out pretty well. I mean, you know, they have a long history.
I mean, the only problem is, you know, if some groups, you know, usually the singer or the guitar player, whoever, usually those are the solo albums that do better. But if somebody starts having hit songs outside of the group, then they're less likely to want to come back to the group.
Right, that's right. I have to ask, I caught a glimpse of are you wearing a Rush Farewell to Kings t-shirt?
Possibly.
Oh, I love it. I love Rush too. You know, it's funny, the story, you remember how 2020 was all messed up and jacked up, and everybody said 2020 sucks. You know what I'm going to say, right? It all started January 7th, 2020 was Neil Peart dies. To me, the story of 2020 will always begin with that event.
Such a
you
shame.
know, it was so sad.
I'm very lucky I got to see them twice live. Very different.
Me too. That's funny. Twice for me too.
I saw them in Cleveland and the Test for Echo tour, where they played 2112 all the way through.
Whoa. See, I saw the Presto tour is when I saw them.
Oh, in 89.
Like,
okay. And then I also
91, I think it was, something like that.
When did I see them the second time? I think 2011. It was the Time Machine tour, and they were just writing songs for what ended up being their last album. So they played like maybe 2 new songs, and they also played a bunch of classic rock covers, but they were also doing this Wheel of Time kind of thing where they would pull a lever and then they played a song from that year, as long as it was between, you know, 74 and 2012, you know.
Wow.
That was kind of fun, because it was kind of like, well, I hope we know this one, kids.
That's great. Well, go enjoy the end of part 3, Eric. It's
all right.
been great catching up.
Well,
thanks for inviting. Thanks for having me. You know,
no problem, man.
Yeah.
And then when you get your revamped version of the book or another book, we'll have you on and we'll do all this fun again.
Sounds great, man. All right, sounds like a plan. Good. God bless you. Godspeed.
All right, take it easy. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye bye.
You too, buddy. See ya. All right, bye.